My name is Colonel Sarah McAllister. I've served in the United States Army for over 20 years, through 3 deployments, 2 commands, and more funerals than I care to count. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what my father said at his wedding. It was a warm Saturday in September, one of those late summer afternoons where the sun lingers longer than it should. Over 100 guests gathered in a rented barn turned reception hall outside Dallas, sipping champagne and watching a man in his 60s dance like he'd never disappointed anyone. That man was my father, and I was standing near the back with a glass of water, trying to stay invisible. He grabbed the mic for a toast, already a few drinks in, beaming like he'd just won the lottery. "To my family," he shouted, raising his glass. "To my real daughter, Emily, who actually made something of herself. Not like—" He turned toward me, eyes glazed but deliberate. "Not like that one. That one's just a nobody. She's not my real daughter." There was a second of silence, the kind that makes your ears ring. Then someone laughed, nervous, awkward. A few others followed, not sure whether to go along with it or look away. I didn't move. I didn't say a word. I just stared at him, every cell in my body trying to stay still. I could feel the stares. Some people didn't know who I was. Others did, and looked anywhere but at me. One woman, his new wife's sister, I think gave me a weak smile, like she wanted to apologize for breathing. I kept holding my glass, feeling the condensation run down my fingers. In that moment, the uniform I'd folded carefully in the trunk of my car felt heavier than body armor. I wasn't wearing it, but it was there. I was there, and somehow, that made me more real than anything he could ever admit. I didn't walk out. I didn't yell or cry. I stood still and let the room decide what to do with the silence. Because sometimes the loudest thing you can say is nothing at all. I grew up in a worn-out duplex off Highway 64 inches Conway, Arkansas. The walls were thin enough to hear the neighbors argue, and the heater rattled loudly in the winter. My mom, Evelyn, worked nights at a diner just off the interstate and came home smelling like grease and burnt coffee. She was the kind of woman who never complained, just kept moving. Her hands were always chapped from washing dishes, her shoulders tight with quiet worry. I don't think she ever had a day off that didn't cost her something. My father was more of a presence than a person. He'd show up unannounced, usually when he was between girlfriends or when his HVAC van needed a repair he couldn't afford. When he was around, he made everything feel smaller. Once, when I was about 10, I dropped a glass at dinner. It shattered on the tile and spilled water all over the floor. He looked at me, then at Mom, and muttered, "You're raising a damn clumsy mule." She didn't answer, just kept wiping the counter like she hadn't heard him. Mom tried to protect me in the ways she could. She'd sneak extra bacon home from the diner or press a $5 bill into my hand on Fridays. But she couldn't shield me from the way he looked through me, like I didn't matter. I learned early not to expect much. I kept my head down at school, never talked back, never missed a homework deadline. While other kids saved up for Game Boys, I saved for shoes that didn't squeak when I walked down the hall. I started working at 13, bussing tables at the same diner, where Mom served breakfast. I scrubbed plates, counted coins, and fell asleep on the couch with my apron still on. It wasn't fair, but it was mine. Then, one spring afternoon in 8th grade, everything shifted. A school career day brought in a row of adults to talk about their jobs. Lawyers, nurses, a farmer, and then her. She walked into the gym in full army dress uniform, dark slacks, sharp jacket, a dozen ribbons across her chest. Lieutenant Anderson. Her voice was calm, steady. She didn't raise it, but when she spoke, the room listened. She told us about teamwork, about leading soldiers, about building a life with purpose. I couldn't stop staring. I didn't know what all those medals meant, but I knew I wanted mine. That night, I told Mom I wanted to join the Army one day. She paused, folding a dish towel, then nodded once and said, "Then you'll earn it." And that was it. No drama, just a quiet green light in a world full of red. From then on, I had a reason to push, a place to aim. I didn't know yet how hard the road would be, but I knew I'd take it. Because somewhere deep down, I believed I could build a life where people saw me, where I mattered. Boot camp at Fort Jackson hit me like a brick wall. The air smelled like wet concrete and sweat, and every morning started with a voice screaming before the sun even came up. I wasn't the fastest, and I sure wasn't the strongest, but I showed up every single day like my life depended on it. Some days, it felt like it did. I failed my first run time and had to repeat the course until my legs gave out. My hands blistered from obstacle drills. My arms shook through push-ups, and there were nights I lay in bed too tired to cry. But I never quit. While some tried to talk their way out of work, I just did the work. I didn't stand out. And maybe that was the point. I just kept showing up, steady as a clock. There was one morning after a freezing night exercise, when a girl in my unit, Rodriguez, turned to me and said, "I don't get how you keep going." I told her the truth, because no one's ever expected me to make it, so I have to. I wrote home to Mom every Sunday. Short notes, just to let her know I was alive and pushing through. She wrote back less often, but when she did, she'd underline words like proud and strong. A bees. There was a drill sergeant named Keating who never smiled. He'd bark orders like he was born to it, and no one dared get in his way. One day during rifle training, I helped a girl who was shaking so hard she couldn't aim. I talked her through her breathing, kept her calm. Later that afternoon, Keating pulled me aside and said, "You got quiet bones, McAllister. That's what leadership looks like." Then he walked off like it was nothing. But for me, it was everything. From then on, I carried that with me, not as a badge, but as a reason to keep doing things right. I didn't need to be loud to be seen. I just had to be consistent. By the time we graduated, some had dropped out, some had scraped by. I stood there, uniform straight, boots clean, knowing I'd earned my place. Nobody handed it to me, and I never forgot that. The reception hall smelled like barbecue and cheap beer. Strings of lights hung from the rafters, and someone's cousin was butchering a country song on the rented karaoke machine. I sat at the far end of a plastic table, nursing a glass of iced tea and trying to feel smaller than my chair. I hadn't worn my uniform. Didn't seem right to bring that part of me here. Besides, it's hard to look like an officer when your name tag says +1. My father worked the room like a small-town mayor, laughing too loud, hugging people too long. When he got to the mic for the toast, I already knew it wouldn't go well. What I didn't expect was how far he'd go. "To my real daughter, Emily," he said, holding his glass high. "The one who followed in my footsteps. The one who's got a real future ahead." He didn't even glance my way, just raised his glass higher and said, "We raised a good one." I felt it before I understood it, that slow burn behind the ribs. No one looked at me directly. A few glanced, then turned back to their plates like nothing had happened. Even Emily shifted in her heels, but stayed silent. I could have spoken up, could have listed my rank, my years of service, my deployments. But none of it would have mattered. Not in that room, not with that man holding the mic, like it was a crown. When the music picked back up, I slipped outside. The evening air was cooler than I expected, and the parking lot was mostly empty. I walked toward my car, trying to breathe past the tightness in my chest. I opened the trunk to grab my jacket and saw it, folded sharply and clean inside the garment bag. My dress, blues, nameplate polished, ribbons aligned. The weight of it hit me all at once. I stood there for a long time. Not angry, not even sad, just tired of shrinking for people who only clapped when it was convenient. Behind me, laughter spilled from the open doors. Inside, I was still nobody. But out here, I remembered who I really was. And maybe that was enough. Or maybe it was time to remind them. The fabric felt heavier in my hands than it used to. My fingers ran along the edges of the garment bag, pausing at the collar where my name sat, stitched above ribbons I never thought much about. But out here, alone in a gravel lot behind a wedding I was never really invited to, Everything about that uniform suddenly mattered. I thought about the first time I wore it, not in training, but in combat. The weight of the body armor over my chest, the way the fabric clung to my back after a 14-hour patrol in 90-degree heat. I thought about the soldiers I'd led, the ones who made it back, and the ones whose names I had to write into final reports. Every ribbon had a story, some proud, some painful, some I still couldn't talk about. And behind each of them was a folded letter, a flag, a family waiting at the door. Was it petty to wear it now? Would it look like I was trying to show off? To prove a point? My father would probably laugh, tell people I was overreacting, and say I always had a flair for the dramatic. But I wasn't angry. That was the strange part. I wasn't even hurt anymore. I was just tired of letting him write my story in rooms full of people who'd never seen the pages. I pulled out my phone and scrolled until I found the number. General Ortiz hadn't been my CO in years, but he always picked up. And sure enough, he answered on the second ring. "Colonel," he said, voice steady. "You good?" I told him everything in a few clipped sentences. He didn't say much, just listened like he always did. When I paused, unsure, he said, "If you're wearing it for them, don't. But if you're wearing it for you, then you've earned the hell out of it." That was all I needed. Not permission, just a reminder. I ended the call and laid the uniform across the back seat. I wiped off a smudge on the shoe and straightened the name tag. Then, I stood there for a moment longer, looking at myself in the car window. I didn't feel like making a scene. I didn't want applause. But I couldn't walk back into that room, pretending I hadn't spent 2 decades becoming someone I could be proud of. So I changed, not out of pride, out of truth. The moment I stepped back into the hall, the room shifted. The chatter dulled mid-sentence, and heads turned one by one like a slow ripple across a lake. My boots clicked softly against the wooden floor, every step measured, every breath steady. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The uniform did all the talking. Full dress blues, rank displayed, ribbons earned, nameplate shining. I kept walking until I reached the center of the room. My father was near the cake table, laughing with an old friend. He looked up, glass in hand, and the smile died on his face. His hand dropped to his side, and for a second, he looked like a man who had seen a ghost. Emily was standing just behind him, holding a plate of food she had suddenly forgotten she had. Her eyes widened as she took in the details. The insignia, the posture. Her voice cracked as she whispered, loud enough for the nearest table to hear, "She's my general." Silence took over again. Not awkward, not heavy, just full of realization. I turned slowly, letting the room see what they had missed. Not to boast, just to exist in full view, unapologetically. Then I spoke. "Some of you may not know me. My name is Colonel Sarah McAllister, United States Army. 22 years of service." That was all. I held the silence for one more beat, nodded once, and walked toward the door. No speeches, no pointed glares, just truth, worn proud and quiet. Behind me, chairs scraped back. I heard someone clap, then another, and then the room filled with something I hadn't felt here all day: respect. Aunt June was the first to clap. It was slow and unsure at first, the kind of gesture that teeters between pride and permission. But then an older man in a Vietnam veteran cap stood and joined her, and the room began to follow. People I didn't recognize came forward with soft smiles and handshakes. A woman hugged me so tightly I could feel her heart beating through her dress. One man, eyes glassy, just said, "Thank you for your service," and walked away like it was all he needed to say. Even some of the family who hadn't looked my way before suddenly found their words. Small comments, quiet admiration. Nobody asked for selfies. They just wanted to see me, finally, for who I was. Outside, the sun had dipped lower, painting the gravel lot in gold and rust. I was halfway to my car when I heard someone call my name. Ashley, my half-sister, was still in her heels, walking fast like she'd almost changed her mind. She stopped a few feet away, arms crossed like she was bracing for a scolding. "I didn't know you were a colonel," she said. I didn't know a lot of things. I didn't lecture her. I didn't need to. I looked her in the eye and said, "You don't have to know everything, but you do have to stand up when you know something's wrong." She looked down at the gravel, nodding. "Yeah, you're right. I." Then she walked back inside without waiting for me to say more. I stood there, a moment longer, letting the weight of the day settle. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't justice. But it was something close to peace. Back at Quantico, the days fell back into rhythm. Morning briefings, readiness reports, unit inspections. The kind of structured routine that never asks who you are outside the gate. But something had shifted. People paused when I walked into a room, not out of fear or formality, but with a different kind of awareness. Respect that didn't need to be spoken out loud. Word of the wedding had traveled, though no one said much. Just a few glances, a nod here and there, and maybe a little less hesitation in salutes. I didn't confirm the rumors or offer a version of the story. I just kept showing up, same as always. Ashley's name came across my desk a week later in a standard report. Minor infraction. Nothing career-ending. I handled it like I would with any other soldier. Direct, fair, by the book. She met with me in my office, stiff-backed and nervous. I kept it professional, gave her clear expectations, and sent her on her way with a reminder. The uniform isn't just earned. It's maintained every single day. By the time the next quarter rolled around, it was back to business. New rotations, updated protocols, no headlines, just a quiet rhythm of leadership. And that's exactly how I liked it. The promotion ceremony was small, mostly internal. A few colleagues, some brass. The kind of event where everyone knows when to clap and when to sit down. I hadn't invited family. I didn't think it mattered. But he showed up anyway. Slipped in during the opening remarks, sat in the back row, didn't say a word. I noticed him because he didn't belong too stiff in a blazer that didn't quite fit. Looking like someone who'd missed the instructions but came anyway. When my name was called and the commendation read, I stepped forward with a practiced posture. No nerves, just habit. The colonel pinned the insignia on my lapel, and we shook hands under the hum of ceiling lights. That's when I heard it. Quiet but clear. "That's my daughter." Heads turned. Just slightly. Not a scene. Not a speech. Just 5 words. Spoken by a man who never quite figured out how to be a father. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. The words weren't perfect, and they didn't fix anything. But they were real. Afterward, he waited by the exit, fidgeting with his keys like he had somewhere else to be. We didn't hug. We didn't talk long. He said, "You look sharp." And I said, "Thanks for coming." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't some grand reunion. But it was enough. Just a crack of light in a wall that had stood for too long. The cemetery was quiet that morning. Just a breeze through the trees and the sound of gravel under my boots. I brought coffee, the kind my mom used to drink. Black and too strong. And sat beside the headstone, like I always do. I told her about the wedding. About the silence, the insult, and the walk back in with my uniform on. I told her about Emily's words, the applause, and the way even the smallest truth can echo when it's finally spoken out loud. I didn't say it to brag. I said it because I wanted her to know I kept my word, that I built something with the name she gave me, that I stood tall when it counted. There's a lesson in all of it, I guess. Not the drama, not the moment, but what comes after. Dignity doesn't always need a stage, but sometimes the crowd needs to see it. So, if you've been made small by someone's voice, remember this: your worth isn't up for debate. You don't have to shout to be seen. You just have to know who you are when it's quiet. And if this story meant something to you, I hope you'll share it. Not for me, But for the next person standing alone in the parking lot, wondering if they should speak up or walk away, sometimes just being seen is the loudest thing you can do.